Good evening, everyone. This is Christopher Ponder. My research project for this course title is Poor Engagement is Affecting Learning Outcomes. And then with our research question, the research question is what are the key factors contributing to poor student engagement in the classroom? And then we'll come on up to our brief introduction. Poor student engagement is a growing issue that affects student learning in school. When students are disengaged, they are less likely to participate in classroom activities, completing assignments, or retain the information they have learned, ultimately leading to lower academic achievement. This is an example of when I was in an elementary school teacher. The biggest problem that I had was my students were not always disengaged with my instruction. So the biggest thing for me that me and my instructional coaches came up with, we came up with different strategies that would help me better give my students more understanding of content while getting their engagement in the classroom, which includes giving them more interactive activities, making sure that they understand the I do, we do, you do in our lessons. And then also factors also include lack of motivation. Sometimes our students, they're not really motivated to want to do work. So they just come to school and they just do what they need to do and just go home every day. Then we also have unentertaining lessons. Of course, as I stated earlier, my lessons were not really entertaining. You know, it was basically black and white how we were when we were in elementary school. And then limited hands-on experience. That's a big one because students in our world today need that hands-on learning because everything's not always on the paper. You know, they have to be active. They have to be moving around in the classroom every day. And also, classroom distractions can also contribute to this as well because when students aren't entertained and their engagement is low, they'll want to distract other students that want to be able to do and learn the instruction. As a result, many students struggle to reach their full potential, which in turn lowers statewide performance. Addressing poor engagement is critical for creating a more effective and supportive learning environment where all students can thrive and succeed. Now we're going to get into the problem with my research project. Problem is that a lack of students making real world connections or world connections in the curriculum can cause students to feel disconnected from what they are learning. This is a big thing for our ESOL students. You know, sometimes they come to the United States, they're not really motivated when they come to our schools because because teachers are not giving those students understandings of not only United States culture but also their cultures in the classroom, especially if they do not like to see how the material applies to their lives or future goals. So if students feel that if they're not going to use this in the real world, why are we learning in the first place? So that's why engagement also becomes a problem within the classroom. Poor classroom management and ineffective teaching strategies can also lead to disengagement. As a teacher, we all know when students come back in our schools, if our classroom management isn't right, we can lose them right away with engagement in the classroom because if we can't control our classroom, what makes you think that they think we understand content area? And then also students also struggle with feeling disorganized or feeling unsupported. If students are supported, they're not going to learn. They're not going to be engaged with our learning. They're not going to be engaged with wanting to come to school. External factors could also include stress, mental health challenges, family issues, because obviously when students come to our schools every day, we don't know what they're going on at home. So when they come here, they don't feel engaged enough to want to be able to learn every day. And also, social economic difficulties can further impact a student's ability to focus and engage. Ultimately, a lack of positive relationships with teachers and peers can create a classroom environment where students feel isolated or unmotivated to learn the content, make it hard for them to engage and learn in the process. So building those positive relationships with our students is one of the first things on top of classroom management that we do at the beginning of the school year. Because if students feel like we give them that positive relationship, let them know that we care about them, they're going to be wanting to learn. If we show them that we don't care, then they're not going to be engaged with instruction and they're not going to be engaged with how we feel about them. Now we're going to go into the framework. The framework. During this research we utilized a thematic analysis. The researcher chose this one because the research identifies, analyzes, and views patterns. When we're doing a study, it's important to understand different patterns because we all know every study is different. You know, we give each other different research questions or the same research question, we're going to get different results at the end. It also understand why poor student engagement is happening more in the classrooms today than in years ago. As we all know, when COVID-19 happened, when our schools were virtual, we lost student engagement because students thought it was fine to learn online. Now they're back in the classroom, some of them still struggle with that. The reason the researcher chose this one, it also to help identify gaps in understanding why poor students' engagement has persisted, as stated earlier, because of COVID-19 pandemic. And as educators and school personnel, what can we do to help return them to the level of their reading and writing and math and other content area skills before the pre-pandemic levels? The methodology of this research. The methodology of this research, it will involve all K through 12 schools and students. However, each school will get the surveys and interviews differently. The different types of mixed method research that we will use is qualitative research. Instead, in K through 5, there will be no interviews with our students. We will be using surveys and interviews. But K through 5 students will not be using interviews. Instead, they will be using the survey. And the way that the survey will work, the researcher will come to the different schools and meet the administrators of elementary schools. Then the principals will distribute the survey to the teachers. How they would distribute the survey to the teachers, they'll receive it in a Google format, and then as a class, the teacher and the students work together to answer the question. Also, grades 6 through 12, they will participate in surveys and interviews. As stated earlier, the researcher will send it to the administration. Administration will bring it back to the teachers. The teachers will then send the link out to the students of the survey on their Chromebooks or whatever technology they may have in their school for that particular time. However, there'll be certain individuals that will be allowed to do interviews after they bring home and bring back signed parental consent forms and also confidentiality forms. Because the biggest thing about being involving interviews is that we need to make sure that we're not disgracing our students in any shape, form, or fashion. The researcher will then send the surveys. On a separate day, the next day after the surveys have been done, the interviews will be conducted. The students chosen for the interviews will not have to complete the survey at all. Because they're already doing the interview, we don't need them to do the survey. The timeline for the research. The research will take place one whole school month, because as a researcher, you got to understand that, anything in the schools change every day. So, we will take place in March before school lets out for spring break, and then ultimately summer vacation after different standardized assessments. This allows schools and school districts to work on making changes or adjustments to existing practices that will improve poor student engagement in the classroom. The reason why this will take accountability that all students will not be present in school to complete. So they may need an extra day, an extra week. Of course, we have some students that won't come on the day the surveys and interviews will be held, so we have to make sure we have time for them to do them. Also, we have to make sure that our internet is used, because sometimes our internet goes out, especially in the 6 through 12 grades. They may not have internet, they can't complete the surveys. Then also with high school students as well. Also, teachers, we need to have that training to understand why the survey is used and interviews are used in the first place. Then we're going to get into, with administrators, how are they going to conduct the interviews with the students? We have to teach them how to get through an interview process. And then also we have those parents that feel that these students will report to the parents what they did in school, and then we'll have parent problems where parents will come to the school complaining. Then we'll go up to the ethical considerations, ethical challenges that the researcher, schools, teachers, and school districts may face during this research. Students could be a lack of student participation. Even though the survey is for Chromebook 6 through 12, they may think that it's busy work. So they feel it's busy work, they're not really going to put effort into completing the question correctly for themselves. And then also, they feel that parents may think that children will be exposed on their school websites or their social media platforms. We may also have a low number of interviews due to students not taking home the parental consent and confidentiality forms needed to participate in interviews. Because of course we have those students that get forms, they send them home, but then we never see them again. Also, steps that the researcher will use to make sure confidentiality will conduct the research is we're going to go to the school district and ask for confidentiality policies on the school district, and then ask for an outline on how it works, and then, if approved, go to the particular schools and ask if they have a specific policy of confidentiality, because as we know, each school has their own policy as well on top of the school district, to make sure that all rules are followed by rules, regulations, and procedures to make sure that there are no rules or laws being broken by the school system, the school district, and ultimately the researcher. We'll also also determined to the schools and school districts that the researcher values the study and the safety of our students, teachers, and other school personnel, and that he does not intend to bring attention or harm in any negative manner. These are the various references that I use throughout this research study. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity and be blessed. Have a great one.